Estamos encantados de estar aquí juntos y esto se lo debemos a la Fundación Cibervoluntarios y a su extraordinario trabajo por facilitar estos espacios tan necesarios. Entonces, no quería dejar pasar la oportunidad para agradecer una vez más a la Fundación y felicitar a todo el equipo por el gran trabajo que está haciendo. Y quería empezar un poquito con una reflexión después de todo lo que escuchamos aquí ayer, porque en maneras creo que se vio claro cómo, bueno, podemos reafirmarnos en la idea de que la economía es lo que cambia el mundo, para bien o para mal, y supongo que eso es en parte cierto, pero también me parece que con todo lo que vimos aquí ayer está bastante claro que al mundo lo cambian también aquellas personas que no se conforman, que están haciendo la diferencia cada día, aunque no las veamos. Y me parece que bueno, el poder estar aquí, siendo testigos de todas estas acciones que otros están llevando a cabo, de gente que ve algo y decide actuar, es súper inspirador y nos recuerda a todos que todos tenemos una responsabilidad para hacer lo mismo. Hoy vamos a continuar la mañana con alguien que sin duda no nos va a decepcionar. Ella es Julie Owono. Good morning.
Hola.
Hola. Ella es abogada, es periodista, es activista, nació en Camerún, aunque hoy vive en Francia, en París.
Sí.
Y bueno, yo no voy a contar mucho de lo que ella hace, porque para eso está ella aquí, para contarnos un poquito más. So, good morning, Julie.
Hello.
Hello. I know that Ángel is going to pass a little video to start.
Julie Owono es activista y abogada especializada en ley internacional. Es la directora ejecutiva de Internet Sans Frontières, una organización que trabaja por un Internet libre, abierto y accesible en todo el mundo. Julie se centra en luchar por los derechos y libertades de la ciudadanía en el entorno digital y el desarrollo global de un Internet sin fronteras. También participa habitualmente como experta en medios como France 24, BBC o HuffPost Live.
Okay. Good, so we are ready to start.
Yes.
Julie, I know that you have a little presentation, and through that presentation, we are going to be able to learn a little bit more about what Internet Without Borders is, and also some of the projects that I think is going to give us a pretty good picture of the work that you have been doing during 10 years now, right?
Okay, the organization, 10 years, but me, I would say 7 since 2010.
It's
yes.
quite a bit now.
It's quite a bit, indeed.
You have something to tell us for sure, so if you want to
Yeah.
start.
So, well, first of all, thank you to Cibervoluntarios and specifically to Ángel and Yolanda, who were very helpful and made it possible for me to be here. It's my first time to speak to the Spanish audience, so I'm very excited, I feel welcomed, and I also want to thank you all for the great ambiance of the conference. So to tell you a bit more about Internet Sans Frontières, so Internet Without Borders, it's an NGO which was created in France in 2008, so almost 10 years. In order, first of all, to defend freedom of expression online, because back in the days, many of the challenges that we face today regarding the internet did not exist. Internet was, at the time, really that platform which allowed people to express beyond the borders the geographic borders that were that they were put in, depending on the country they lived in. So we first started to defend bloggers. So, for instance, one of our first very important campaign was to defend Ocean Direction. So that's the next slide, if possible. Yeah, Ocean Direction. I don't know if some of you know him. He is a very famous blogger in Iran. He's called the blog father because if you remember in 2011, there was the Green Revolution in Iran. many were hopeful that the social media revolution would also open up the country. Unfortunately, we remember this young woman who was killed during demonstrations, and Ocean Direction was the one who organized all these communities and participated in the blogging and the Twitter messages that were sent by citizens and activists during the revolution. So he was imprisoned, of course, because of that, and many organizations, and specifically Internet Without Borders, mobilized. He was finally freed in 2014, if I remember well. And yes, it was a victory, but of course he had spent too much time already in jail. So yes, that was our basic, our first commitment, free expression online. But of course, due to the challenges that, you know, the other challenges that the internet faced, it was not only about being able to express freely online, it more and more became about protecting another right, which is so important, which is the basis of many other fundamental rights, and for us it's the privacy. We believe that without privacy, privacy is essential, is an essential space and right for people to be able to form opinion and then to express them freely, of course. So we realized that more and more it was endangered by private sector companies, of course, and specifically social media ones, and then by the state, specifically regarding the mass surveillance debate following the NSA revelations by Edward Snowden. So we now our aim, our objective basically, is to promote first, and defend an open and free internet, free as in, not free in money, we would love to, but free as in, as in rights, freedoms, a space respectful of fundamental freedoms, and also a space accessible to all without discrimination. So whether you are man, woman, able or disabled, black or white, whatever, you have the right to have access to that common good. I will continue with some other slides. So to give you some idea of the projects we do, to follow up on the free expression, we helped also a very famous blogger from Chad. Chad is a country in Central Africa, a dictatorship, basically. This blogger was, his life was endangered, and we helped him get an asylum in France. So now he's a refugee in France. So these are the things that we also do. We help endangered people who express their opinions and who are endangered, and we help them when we can, because it's becoming more and more difficult to get the refugee status in Europe. We help them come to France. But we don't only do that. We also truly believe that internet is indeed and should be a tool for social, economic, and political empowerment. And this is only possible if it's a free and an open space. Obviously, if you have a space where, depending on where you are, you have access to certain information or not, obviously this will not empower you enough to envision the large possibilities of what you can do with the internet. So one thing we did is to also develop social impact programs. We developed applications, and specifically I'm very proud of this one, which is called Fuel. So it's an open data platform which tracks electricity blackouts in the global south, specifically in Africa. It was a very important project. We launched it in 2013, and it helped us. There are huge electricity problems in Africa, as some of you might know, and nobody knew the extent of the problem. But everybody wanted to implement solutions, build big dams, and we thought, how can you find solutions adapted to a situation which you know nothing about? So we decided to produce this platform. It's an app and platform through which citizens could, through which we crowdsource. So citizens sent us reports of the shutdowns they were faced, internet blackouts. I'm making a lot of confusion between internet shutdowns and electricity blackouts because we are also working on internet cuts in the world. So that's why, sorry about the confusion. But here, it's electricity, and people could send alerts, and it allowed us to map the problem of electricity cuts in a specific city in sub-Saharan Africa called Douala in Cameroon. So this is one of the projects that we do, social impact project that we do. The next slide, please.
Let me ask you,
yeah.
All these projects, which is your team? Like, how many people are in your team, or do you collaborate or work together with other organizations?
Yes.
How is the process?
We have a core team of 9 people spread all around the world. So in Paris, in Marseille, in France, in Lomé, in Togo, in Yaoundé, Douala, Cameroon, Dakar, Senegal, Belo Horizonte, Brazil. We used to have someone in Moscow, but the person had to flee for obvious reasons because she's a journalist opposed to the regime. So we have a team spread out on several places and continents. But of course, we also collaborate with correspondents. We collaborate with a huge network of civil society organizations. And basically, I would say that we can reach up to, I made the calculation yesterday, a bit randomly, but we could reach up to 200,000 people approximately spread out in the world. And this is why many of our campaigns and projects have had such impact. And I will specifically talk about this very important campaign that we did at the beginning of 2017. Internet was cut in some parts of Cameroon because there were demonstrations there, and people did not have access to internet anymore. So we launched this campaign, Bring Back Our Internet, with several friends from other organizations, including a great organization called Access Now, which I advise also to visit. And we did this campaign. It was crazy. All the international media covered it. Everybody knew about the internet shutdown in Cameroon. Even people who had never heard about Cameroon. Even Edward Snowden, he tweeted about the fact that we should all be outraged against internet shutdowns anywhere in the world because, and I quote him, if it happens there, it will happen to us at some point. And this is something very important which we'll talk about on the interconnection between situations in the global south and situations in the global north. So we have some interesting outreach in terms of communities we touch and who trust us, basically. And the next slide, please. And we're also very, very happy to work on digital inclusion. So as I was saying, one of our aims is to secure internet access without discrimination to all. And this is one project which I'm also very proud of, is closing the gender digital gap in Cameroon, so Central Africa. And this is a website which we did, and we featured all these women Cameroonian women who explain how the internet had basically changed their lives or how it helps them do their job. This woman is saying that it has been very helpful for her job search. The other woman, the third one, says she's been able to increase her turnover thanks to the ability to reach out to more to a broader audience without borders, thanks to the internet. So this is part of the things that we do. And the last thing we do, we also deal with youth in youth and internet, and specifically in Brazil, where we have Internet Sem Fronteiras. And the project works on youth and citizen journalism, especially youth from the favelas. So as you know, the favelas are usually portrayed in a very negative way. And many of these youth wanted to give another vision, another image of what their reality was. So they launched a sort of a media, an online media, where they tell their stories. They learn how to film, to use a camera, and they learn how to blog. And yeah, they try to tell their own stories using the internet. So these are some of the projects we do. And one thing we foster a lot, and we'll talk about that, and something that is very common in all these projects, is that we foster collaboration between north, south, east, west, everywhere. We think that wherever there is expertise and wherever there is a need, we need to link up those two. For all this project, it was a collaboration between northern organizations and southern ones, southern communities. And so this is something that is really at the heart of our mission and the way we do our projects.
This is really great to hear because, can you hear me okay? Okay. It's really great to hear because it is true. I feel like there is that disconnection and what is being done and what is still to be done to resolve that, and what are the opportunities that we are missing because we are not really crossing all that knowledge. Let me just go back for a second to the previous slide because, well, we are two women here, and you were talking about women in Cameroon. I don't know if we can talk about, of course, probably not, a whole region. And what is talking about gender and access to the internet? Can you tell us a little bit more about how is that for women, maybe in Cameroon specifically, but like maybe a little bit more around the region?
Well, globally, there is an inequality in internet access between men and women observed worldwide. Although, to some extent, in the north, of course, the inequality is less important because many more people are connected. And in the global south, the inequality could go from 30 to 50% difference in terms of connectivity. In a country like Cameroon, we found out that women had 20% less chances to be connected and to use the internet than men. And it does, I mean, it has some explanations, of course, due to the economic aspects. Women earn less money than men, and since internet access is still very expensive for many in many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, obviously women cannot invest so much money in getting online. But your question is very, very important, and it relates also to, I would say, my own story, because I like to say that I'm the product of the open and free internet. Because obviously, if if this space hadn't existed 7 years ago when I started, I obviously wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't have had the opportunities I've had. Basically my voice counted at some point. Despite the fact that I am an immigrant in Europe, despite the fact that I am an African immigrant, and despite the fact that I am a woman. So I had all the disadvantages, I would say, although I don't see them as advantages, but as strength. But the society could see them as disadvantages. And despite all these obstacles, I am able to speak to a lot of people, and it has expanded my horizon, and that's part of the work I do. That's why I do what I do, because I want other women to profit from this and to be
able to do so.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is part of what I wanted to talk about with you. That piece that Yolanda was mentioning before, like the human component of what is done. We heard about your projects, and I'm interested for you to tell us, when was it that you saw something, or how was the process that you kept seeing something that was bothering you? And when was the time that, boom, there was a spark, and you decided to, actually at that point, I guess you were aware of the tool that you had to just make use of, and decided to just take action. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, I think the tipping point was that I was really literally, I'm sorry about the expression, but I was literally pissed off not to see anything about my region of origin, so Sub-Saharan Africa. And whenever there was something, it was always negative. So wars, rapes, although it's true. I'm not saying it's not true. But it's not the only reality. It didn't correspond to the reality I was seeing. So I just said, okay, I have space and nobody can stop me, prevent me from using it except myself. So I started writing about countries which were either undercovered or not covered in their full reality. Countries like, of course, mine, Cameroon, countries like Ivory Coast in Western Africa, many countries in Western Central Africa. And specifically, I wanted to focus on how back in that time, so in 2010 already, many people were using the internet to create solutions to problems that had existed for 40, 60 years and which had never been solved. The electricity project is actually inspired from what we saw. Like, for instance, this community in Ivory Coast there was a huge crisis in 2010 after elections. And this community actually used Ushahidi, which was a platform created in Kenya in 2007, a platform to map, emergency situations in the country. So it was based on crowdsourcing. People would send SMSs to a number connected to the platform, and then the emergency situation would be reported on the platform. So they used it to basically help emergency services identify people who had been wounded by weapons or any emergency situation. And I was really wondering, and on the contrary, in the media, it was only about, of course, the crisis itself, which is important again, but which was only part of the reality. So I just said, okay, I'll just report about what's positive happening out of this mess, and I'll also help highlight some of the great profiles and citizens who took responsibility, because it's really about taking responsibility, not sitting back and waiting for good fate to come. Yeah, that's what really triggered. I was like, no, I can't anymore. This does not correspond to the young continent. I know Africa is the youngest continent in the world, so obviously when you talk about youth, you talk about creativity, and it did not correspond to what I was seeing. So that was the tipping point, and 7 years later, I would say that it was worth it. Now the media, although there are still some terrible reportings, of course, but the media pay more attention to how they portray things, not only one-sided reporting, but objectively reporting things, the good and the bad ones. And I think it's important to change the perspective from Europeans and Northern citizens in general, not to perceive the other just as a threat or someone who is in despair, but also as someone who has been able to bring something positive to a society back home, and who could do that also anywhere else. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And you are emphasizing something that we also heard in the conversation before, and I think it's very important. I also work with Latin America, and how many times I've been listening to people doing things in remote places, and it's just, what? That you were doing what? In the Amazonas, in Brazil, like 20 years ago? That's what this guy now is talking about here in the United States. Yeah. So that's relevant, and I'm very happy that you are doing the work that you're doing, and I'm sure many others are also trying to push these issues and show both sides, because we do have a lot to learn from those that we only hear bad things. So thank you for pointing that out. Yeah, in this process, I'm assuming that everything was not easy and smooth. You found challenges and obstacles, but you're still here fighting. Yeah. How is it that you do to overcome obstacles? How do you motivate yourself? What do you tell yourself when things are not going the way
you want? Really, it's thinking that you know, in French there is, I don't know if there is an equivalent in English, there is the butterfly effect. I don't know if that exists, yeah? So any little thing that you, I mean, every little thing that you think is unworthy or maybe hopeless or whatever, actually does have an effect and actually does change the life of someone in another country far, far, far away. And I think this is what pushes me and others who are part of this adventure. It's a lot of commitment, and I'm sure Ciber Voluntarios would tell the same story. It's a lot of commitment, and sometimes you don't even see the direct results of what you do, but seeing how things are evolving, seeing that more and more people are online in the global south and specifically sub-Saharan Africa, seeing how they're using this space, although it's in danger now, but we'll talk about that later. Yes, I'm just thinking that the sacrifice, if we have to talk about sacrifice, but it's worth it. It's totally worth it, and it's absolutely worth our commitment, because we are talking about shaping the future now. I obviously don't want my son to live in a world where he will be perceived as incompetent just because he has a different color, or he will be stuck in a country just because he probably does not have the right passport, or he will feel despaired thinking that, oh, the government doesn't do anything for me, so I just have to wait until things get better. No, I don't want that. So, I think that's what pushes us all, building a better future for the citizens to come. We've seen what this wonderful revolution and innovation called the internet has brought to us, and it should, I mean, we have to unleash the most of it so that those coming after will just continue using it to the fullest and hopefully fulfill the ambition of the project, which was to bring closer together the humanity and fostering more equality among humans. So, yeah.
Well, that is a message that we definitely, all of us here, can make our own message. And that's why these spaces are so important. Because from here, we can just go out there and start, even with a very little gesture. And now, like, as you mentioned, like the butterfly effect, still I'm not sure if that is the name.
It is.
All right. El efecto mariposa en español. So yeah, even if we don't see it, we know it's making an impact.
Absolutely.
And we all have the responsibility, and we will talk more about that.
Yes.
But let's start talking about now something that we've been mentioning, the two realities, North and South, and the benefits of the internet, but also the challenges and the threats of the internet. And how, obviously, in terms of access, obviously the North is ahead. Mm-hmm. And that is good in a way, but also we saw yesterday, and we are all aware of how many other issues, things get more sophisticated, and with that sophistication, we start seeing issues as privacy, surveillance, fake news, and all those things. Talking about a region like Africa, that is mostly what you're focused on, and more access to the internet, of course, eventually they are facing, and they will be facing all those challenges.
Of course.
How is it now, and what do you think is needed for that not to happen also to the global south?
The situation is quite worrying. Many people talk about the leapfrog of sub-Saharan Africa, and Africa in general, the connectivity leapfrog, so being able to, in a very short amount of time, go from no internet connectivity to a lot. I think I saw a figure like 70% mobile internet connectivity in some countries, which is huge, in less than 5 years. So the same way we've been able to leapfrog in terms of connectivity, we are also leapfrogging in terms of challenges and dangers. Because basically there is a pattern. So the Europe and Northern America and Oceania, of course, were able to discover internet 20 years ago, 25 years ago, the web specifically. I would say that until very recently, many of us were very naive. We thought that it would stay very free space, that we could do, we could be free on that space, free from the sight of, of the government and of other corporations. And unfortunately, there are many things that were seen a bit too late, but it's never too late at the same time. And so there have been a lot of expertise and knowledge which was created, and theories also on how and why the internet should be protected and who should have the responsibility to do so. I will take one very good example, which is a privacy issue. I think 7 years ago when I started, privacy was not that much of an issue in Europe. Some people were sounding the alert, but most of the people were didn't even know about that, and were, I would say, probably a bit naive once again, including me. But of course, with all that's happened, we had to open our eyes. But there have been many organizations which had been sounding the alert. I don't remember all the names now, but many of them lobbied at government level in order to protect EU citizens, although even EU citizens didn't know, as I was saying, about the threats that were coming. But these organizations tried to foresee what was coming and lobby the government. And until today, we have the GDPR, so the privacy regulation, which has come into force, and which, to some extent, protects way much better the European citizens from attacks on its privacy. Although things could be way better, I totally agree with that. But at least there is a foundation. You've all read that yesterday Facebook was fined by Spanish authorities on the use of personal data of Spanish citizens. So these things do not exist today in sub-Saharan Africa. There is absolutely, even when there are regulations, there is absolutely no enforcement of the regulation in most of the countries that we work in. And this is a problem because many corporations have understood this, so they're fastly getting they want to connect the continent, which is great. Again, who could agree against, who could be against the will to connect everyone? But at the same time, they're doing it on their own terms. And we have no regulation authority like here in Europe, which understands that it's important to protect the personal data of your citizens, who don't even think that personal data are, it's not a problem, privacy, who cares about privacy? So yeah, we're trying to connect the know-how, the knowledge, the achievements that have been made in Europe on these questions, in the EU specifically on these questions, with civil society in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, who perceive that there are challenges upcoming, but don't know how to fight against it, don't even know whether it's wrong or right. So it's important for us to, yes, connect these two worlds and say, yeah, there are people there who need you, who need to work with you. And also, vice versa, these people can bring, because one of our findings is that most of the repression tools that are used here today were tested in sub-Saharan Africa even until now. We're talking about surveillance today, but surveillance was tested by European companies maybe 5-10 years ago, in repressive regimes in Africa, the Middle East, of course, and so many other places, because these markets were interesting testing grounds, because there wasn't a lot of connected population, so it was easy to identify who was opponent, who was saying what. So all these tools that are used today by many Western governments were tested in sub-Saharan Africa. So I think there is a dialogue that can go on. Many in sub-Saharan Africa know what surveillance is. The case I talked about, so the Chadian blogger, he was arrested because he's computer had been spied on, and all his horses were taken to jail and tortured because of a very useful tool sold by a European company. So these people know what are the threats, and at the same time, they don't necessarily know how they can, defend themselves and what arguments they can develop to force regulators, to force authorities to protect them more. And that's what we want to do, bridging these two worlds, and hopefully preventing the challenges faced here in Europe from, spreading on the internet development in sub-Saharan Africa, and vice versa, anticipate on the challenges in terms of surveillance that are already tested there in sub-Saharan Africa to arrive one day in Europe.
When you try to do that, do you do it trying to raise awareness on citizens? Is there a way also to work in some way with corporations and governments? How do you approach that?
Well, we think that we don't have the means to, how would I say this, to, sorry, I'm looking for my word in English, thinking in French at the same time, but basically we think that the approach, we are lucky that we have a very important community behind us, so we're using that number to basically say that if things don't change, we have the ability to
mobilize,
enlighten more people, and these people will probably use less your tools, so we're trying to use a bit of bargain. So far, I wouldn't say it hasn't been always very efficient, especially on the issue of privacy, specifically because we need to have authorities with us, so personal data authorities in particular, and unfortunately so far they have not been very responsive, but we're not giving up. I will be going to Dakar in Senegal, for instance, in a few days, and I will meet with the authorities and discuss with them some of the challenges we've identified and tell them who we are working in the country and who could potentially help enlighten the population more on these challenges. So yes, for now, our number is our strength, obviously, so we are trying to use that to bargain, but it's not easy, once again, when governments themselves just give up. We don't have the power to force any company to do anything. We just have, to force in terms of using the law, but we have the power to force change through our numbers. So that's what we try to apply.
As a journalist, as someone who is reporting about issues that are happening to raise awareness or to mobilize people, what do you see that is the role of media? And here we can be talking about traditional media versus like new media. How do you see that world, and what do you think is the role, and are they using the power of communication in the right way?
Well, in my opinion, the opposition that was put out on both types of media, so traditional versus new media, in my opinion, that opposition does not reflect the whole truth, again, because while new media has this capacity to reinvent itself very rapidly, to be very creative and adapt very rapidly to the changes of the audience or of the tools that we use, this creativity probably was lacking to traditional media, who until very recently even probably some of them despised that, unfortunately. But at the same time, new media probably would benefit, and I think it's really high time for that, especially in these times of fake news, would truly benefit from the traditional methodology of journalism, which is how to investigate, how to tell facts in the most objective way as much as possible, although we all have an opinion. How to basically report without necessarily forcing the other, having adopting your opinion. So I think there is, again, yeah, they could both benefit. I mean, they need each other today, that's obvious. I mean, there are many practices and many good stuff that the new media have been able to do, but at the same time, we do need more than ever this investigative and in-depth and slow journalism. Many are talking about slow journalism to some extent to make sense of all this amount of news we're receiving every day and don't necessarily have the means to identify what could be the closest to the true or what could be a more trustful source. So I think that's why online media such as The Intercept, which was created by Glenn Greenwald, so the journalist who revealed, who participated in the revelations of Edward Snowden for The Guardian at the time. So yes, that's why his type of journalism is getting some traction, I think, at the moment, because people do need, in this time of fake and a huge amount of news, people need indeed to take the time and get the tools to interpret what they're sent through the internet specifically.
Yeah. Another great example of how we cannot think that we know everything and that we constantly need to be open to see what we can learn from each other and how we can improve with each other work. And this also applies not just to traditional media versus new media, but also in the space of communication and what is it that is communicated again back to the North and the South, and how media in general are communicating about different, these two realities. It is obvious that there is a gap. How do we solve that?
I think to answer that, we have to go back a bit in history. If you remember back, so we're in 2017, so 13th century. How many centuries is that back? I'm very bad at math, I'm sorry. So back 13th, 14th century, some of you might know, but there had been links already between the North and the South, and even the city we're in is a proof of that, of the interactions between Northern and Southern Mediterranean Sea. So, and beyond that, I'm very interested in presence of Africans in Europe in the Middle Age. And I found that there was the second son of a famous king, emperor of the Congo, so Congo, which correspond approximately today to the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Angola. So this emperor had sent his son to be a priest here in the Vatican. And it was a tradition at the time for European well-off families to send the second son as a religious in the religion, to serve as a religious. And I was very surprised that yes, there had been those things. And even I found some paintings back in 13th century, 14th century of representatives, diplomats from Sub-Saharan Africa, and specifically from the Manding, sorry, it's somewhere in West Africa, so current country called Mali. And there were representatives sent with all the riches, with all the gold, and in a very, very spectacular way. And suddenly, when the 15th century, 16th century came, we started talking about slavery, and the citizens from Sub-Saharan Africa and Africa in general were probably perceived more as less humans. And I was wondering what made the shift. And from my research so far, capitalism made this shift in terms of, in terms of seeing the other as a merchandise, who could help produce more and in a less amount of time. So trying to draw a comparison, I think that today we are at the time, thanks to this tool, to, as I was saying, bringing closer this whole humanity. Oh, and there is another example between the dialogues, not only north-south, but also east-west. We talked about music yesterday, and there is one musical theory. Okay, I'm saying this, I'm not a musician, it's my partner who's a pianist, so I hear about music every day, so obviously at some point it's interesting for me as well. So there was this musical theory called, and methodology, I think we can call it, called the equal temperament. And it was discovered, I mean, a researcher in China had discovered it, and it was taken to Europe through Jesuits, I think we call it in English as well, who came back to I think, Italy at the time, who had been on a mission to China and who had come back to Italy to share what they had found at the time. And so we have examples in the past of the dialogues and the collaborations that existed between Europe and the rest of the world. And today, I think with the internet, we are almost at the same stage, is that we have this tool, these channels of communications, of direct communications, without the preconceived idea made up by, I don't know, years of unfortunate history, I would call it. But obviously, this is endangered because, again, of capitalistic internet, an internet which would be more comfortable if people did not and could not talk to each other. So if the internet in Spain was not the same as the internet in Russia, or was not the same as internet in wherever country, instead of that open internet, which we're all trying to build and to harness, which allows people to exchange all the ideas, to enrich themselves, and to create better, to create innovations, simply. I remember yesterday the Mahmoud, I think, who was sitting here, and who was telling that his team is composed of people from China, India. That's crazy. It's fascinating. So probably this wouldn't have been that easy and that made that possible without a tool as the internet. And obviously this is threatened if you have a world where the internet is only some part of the internet, that people don't have access to the full knowledge and all the riches of what is exchanged on this platform. Obviously, you cannot, I mean, there is no positive way out. So I think it's even more urgent. It's not only a question of our rights are Europeans or our rights as African. I think it's really beyond all this. It's building the future for the humanity we want. And I think it's better when humanity talk to each other. That's my opinion. Probably others disagree, but yeah, that's...
Well, I support you on that opinion. And I congratulate you for the work that you are doing.
Thank you.
And, well, for everything that you have shared this morning, again, is up to all of us. So, well, hopefully that world that you are imagining and that you are working to achieve will happen. And we are all together in this mission.
There are many here. If every one of us does something, then tomorrow it will be a big something being coming out of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are running out of time, but we have time for maybe 2 questions, 2 quick questions.
This is kind of probably an old and somewhat boring question, but the thing that keeps coming to my mind is, what if the internet is fully open and fully free? How do we do you think it just will naturally happen that the good will pervade? And how do you control the spread of really destructive and very, I guess, harmful ideologies or groups, or I won't name any names, but it is quite a scary thing. If there's full expression and full freedom, who decides what's good and what's bad, and who protects, I guess, basic human rights and freedoms?
Yeah. That's a very, very important and very good question, and timely as well. It's really something that we asked ourselves at several occasions. I remember, for instance, we had a very huge debate internally back in 2012 during the French presidential election. Twitter, no, it's not, yeah, it was on Twitter, and there were anti-Semitic attacks against personalities in France. And many groups were advocating for Twitter to identify the anonymous users and handing the identification and IP numbers in particular to the police. So we had an internal debate wondering what we should do, whether we should protect free speech and no matter what, or just say that there are things that are not possible. And I think on this, we don't have to, I mean, we've created some very powerful in the physical world, and these tools, like it was said yesterday by Aral specifically, are human rights conventions who were created by a community of states, the community we know now under the name of the United Nations. We might not agree with the organization itself, but at least the tools that are created give a pattern to follow and give an inspiration. And beyond that, I don't think we can have a perfect world in the web. Like, we will never have the perfect world, unfortunately. I mean, in the physical world, you still have some very nasty people. But at least we don't need to reinvent things. We've already created these powerful tools. And basically, the only limit should be legal. So the principles for stopping negative opinion from expressing online is it should be legal, so written in a law. It should be proportionate, of course. The measure should be proportionate. So, for instance, you cannot kill someone because he said bad things on the internet, and it should be necessary for the purpose. The purpose you want to pursue. So we have the existing tools. It's just now about transitioning them from the real world, the material world we know, to the virtual one. And I think this is something that the United Nations has started itself because in 2016, so last year, July the 1st, the organization basically said that the human rights that we enjoy offline should be protected with the same strength online. So it gives grounds for organizations such as us, and even for states to, basically apply what they used to apply offline to the extent that they applied it, because some states don't. But yeah, that's another debate. But at least the tools that exist offline should be applied online as well. So there is no perfect world. And it's also upon us. Educate more people. I mean, educate the kids of today, educate adults even today on the importance of not stopping at the first opinion you see expressed online, and which seems to echo some of the preconceived ideas you had. Try to go beyond that. It's challenging, but it's way more enriching. And that's what I think organizations like that, like us, should probably foster a bit much and do a bit much better. Yeah, thanks.
I think we are, we don't have any more time for questions. It was clear to me by looking at you. But Julie will be around, so if someone wants to talk to her, I'm sure she will be happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you again, Julie.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for all of you.